الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. اللهم ربنا أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم إنا نسألك أن تنصر أهل غزة وارزقهم يا الله القوة والصبر واربط على قلوبهم يا رحمن وأنزل عليهم من رحماتك يا رحمن. يا رب داوي جرحاهم وتقبل موتاهم واشف مرضاهم يا الله. يا رب أسألك أن ترزق أهل غزة والنصر والثبات والتمكين وبارك يا رحمن في صبرهم وإيمانهم يا الله. يا الله تقبل دعانا وصلي وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. Okay. The question, however, remains: what theory best accounts for the state? So, what is a theory in the first place? A theory, according to its dictionary meaning, for example, is a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something. Especially something based on general principle, independent of the things to be explained. Independent of things to explain. The theory of state would be explanation of a state based on intended to explain a state, independent of something to be explained. So, in explaining a state, you can't use observation about a state, I guess. But in a sense, the purpose of theory is to understand reality. And every theory is a simplification in a sense, because you want to predict future and you don't have access to future. And also what you are explaining, you can't explain it merely based on observation for various reasons. For example, you don't have all the observation available anyway, and it would be too messy and really won't be useful just compiling a lot of so you simplify it and try to get to the core of that thing, so you can predict how it will behave in the future, or how will it behave in different circumstances, for example. So that I would say is a definition of theory anyway in this context. So since there is time and space only for some suggestions rather than a full-scale defense of a new theory of the state, I shall come to the point. The theorist who gives us the best theory of the state we have so far is Hume. I guess he means David Hume. And any advance we might make should build on Hume's insights. To appreciate what Hume has to offer, we should consider briefly what the main alternatives are before turning to Hume. This seems a bit abrupt, but anyway, I don't remember all we did before this, but let's go ahead. We might usefully do this by posing the question in a way that Hume would have appreciated. What interest does the state serve? So this is already a materialistic definition of state theory, based on, because interest in the modern context anyway, they are material interests basically. And order is also a material interest because it's the foundation of all other interests. So among the first answer to be offered was among the first answers to be offered was that presented with different reasoning by Borden and Hobbes, the interest of everyone in peace or stability or order. Peace and stability and order. That's one of the main ingredient or justification for for the state or the government since time immemorial. So each developed this answer in politically similar circumstances. Religious wars that reflected the declining power of a church trying to hold on to political influence. More like civil wars rather than. Both thinkers defended conceptions of the state as absolutist. At least highly authoritarian. To make clear, how can the state be authoritarian? I mean, the government can be authoritarian. Well, I guess the state can be authoritarian too. But I would say a state is by definition absolutist. But we'll come to that in a minute. To make clear that the point of the state was to preserve order in the face of the challenges to the peace posed by the church or by the proponents of group rights such as monarchomachs. Monarchomachs. I would say that order and peace is always something which every state tries to. So order and stability or peace is something constant throughout the history. In terms of the justification for the state, the state was best understood. The state was best understood as the realm of order, to be contrasted with the state of war signified by its absence threatened by its dereliction. Crucially for both thinkers, the state had to be conceived as a single sovereign entity whose powers were not divided or to be shared either by different branches of the government or by different elements in a mixed constitution. I guess this is one of the meaning of the absolute in this context. I don't remember whether he defined the state before this or not. But anyway, among the problems with this view is that it is not clear that the state is needed to secure order, nor plausible to think that divided government is impossible. Now he has come to by divided government probably means government between government by government and the state, division between government and state. Among the problems with the view, they think that the state is needed to secure order. Well, if you want to do it on a permanent basis, you would think, I mean, if you define a state as something, a coercive or legitimate use of power in general, so then that is needed in order to secure order in a stable way, I would think. Let's see. The conception of the state as the conditions in which order is possible looks unlikely, not only because the state may sometimes act in ways that are destructive of order, and even self-destructive, but also because order has existed without a state. when I mean something like the state would have to be there in order for, because that's by definition what a state is. um, and the other thing is, just because something can act in a destructive way, so doesn't mean that it can't be a custodian of order. For example, nuclear weapons can be used destructively and self-destructively, but for sure they are, or many people think they are, you know, they are able to sustain order, for example, or peace. Indeed, one of the problems the Hobbes social theory of in particular is explaining how the state could come into being if it really is the result of agreement voluntarily to transfer power to a corporate agent. Since the state of war is not conducive to making or keeping agreements, what it might result in, and that this will be true only if we think that Hobbes' state of war is something actual. It doesn't have to be. Just the danger of it, or the specter of it, or the prospect. It doesn't look as though the point of the state is to serve our interests in order, even if that were our sole primary interest. Doesn't look like as the point of the state. I would have thought order and peace is something very fundamental. Because if we don't exist, peace and existence, and that's how most states justify, and all the other reasons come behind that. And that's similar to human beings themselves. Like, whatever objectives you have, you do need survival in order to achieve those objectives. So survival is by definition very basic human instincts, and to that extent, it seems to me, at this point anyway, that is a very basic foundation of the states and its existence, the order and the specter of war and the specter of violence, for example. That's why you give up your freedoms. And even today, that's like one of the greatest tools of keeping the state oppression, or even the state hegemony, to keep people, because people are afraid of chaos, people are afraid of violence, people are afraid of disorder. So far this seems to me a very, very weak point anyway. The other point of the state is that it serves our interest in freedom. Two theories of this kind were offered by Rousseau and Kant. In Rousseau's account, the emergence of society brings with it the loss of a kind of freedom, as natural man is transferred into a social being ruled directly or indirectly by others. The recovery of the freedom is not entirely possible, but freedom of a kind is attainable in the state, which is the embodiment of the general will. The state is the embodiment of the general will. fairly hard concept um, to get come to in order to comprehend. But I would say general will is the will of really, general will is what I should will, really. So it's not the will of an individual. It's not the will of the collection of individual, but the will of humanity, or what humanity should will. But anyway, we will come back to that at some point. Living in such a state, we can be free as beings who are ultimately subject not to others but to laws. To laws. And that would be free because we are the one who have created those laws we give to ourselves. That's the conception of autonomy, which Kant took from Rousseau, among others. Drawing inspiration from Rousseau's conception of freedom, which is, I guess, one is as autonomy. I guess Kant presents a slightly different contractarian theory. It's not clear whether among the contractarians it's an actual situation or they're using it as a conceptual tool, as a counterfactual argument. But one with a similarly happy ending. Well, Rousseau's is not happy ending as such. There's much more complexity in Rousseau. But anyway, the antithesis of the state is the state of nature, which is a state of lawless freedom, which is no freedom for Kant. In that condition, all are morally obliged to contract with one another to leave the state to ensure a juridical realm in which freedom is regulated by justice. By justice, he means freedom self-regulates through universalization, so that the freedom of each can be compatible with the freedom of all. Equality is an important concept in that. That states our interest in freedom. But here, freedom is not freedom to do something, but freedom is autonomy, a particular conception, a moral conception of freedom. In that sense, Kant invented the conception of freedom, autonomy. So, our interest in freedom by first serving the interest in justice, which is equal freedom for all. If Hobbes thought that whatever the state decreed was eo ipso just, Kant held that the justice presuppose the existence of the state, or at least the existence of or absence of violence, I guess. But that would be like a minimalist definition you will need for anything. Hobbes thought that whatever the state decreed was eo ipso just. I don't think Hobbes thought that, but let's say that. What is difficult to see in Kant's account is why there is any obligation for everyone in the state of nature to enter into a juridical realm rather than simply to agree or abide by the requirement of morality or form different ethical communities. Why should freedom require the creation of single juridical order? Well, that you will find in his treatise on world peace. But let me not go into that. It is no less difficult to see why the state might solve the problem of freedom in Rousseau's account. If in reality there is a conflict between different interests and some can prevail only at the expense of the other, it seems no better than a cover up to suggest that all interests are served equally well, since all are free when governed by the laws that reflect general will. Well, general will is the will to freedom. I think the argument is eventually, I think that everybody, what Rawls said, everybody needs freedom and basic goods to fulfill their plans. And that's the general interest which cannot be fulfilled without, according to Kant and Rousseau and Rawls and others, without creating a state, eventually a capitalist state. If this is the case, the states serve our interest freedom only by feeding us the illusion that we are free when in fact we are subordinated by others. That might be the case, but the justification is clear, I think, that everybody needs basic goods and freedom in order to fulfill their plans, whatever they plan, those plans might be. Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop because he is going to talk about Hegel from now. Okay, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب